Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Collins, high quality student books, teacher guides and unbeatable value revision for GCSE and A-level sociology. Sociology Show listeners can get 25% off Collins sociology resources until the end of December 2021. And that includes a new book called How to Be a Sociologist, which is an inspiring introduction to studying sociology at A-level and university. If you'd like to take up this offer, then simply head to collins.co.uk/sociology. And if you enter the code Sociology Show at the checkout, then you are entitled to 25% off some of those sociology goodies. The Sociology Show podcast is also brought to you in association with Tutor2You, the exam performance specialists for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutor2you.net/sociology, and there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so on to this episode, and I was delighted to welcome Jim Hunter and Louise Owusu-Kwarteng onto the show to talk about what can we do with sociology. In other words, how can the subject change? How can it adapt? Should we get rid of exams? Should we have more coursework? And actually, what is the purpose of having sociology as a subject altogether? So first, you'll hear from Jim, and later on in the conversation, Louise joins us. So without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi, Jim. Thank you very much for joining the podcast. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. We might also be joined by Louise in a little bit, but listeners will be aware of who Louise is. She's been on a couple of times, but you are a Sociology Show virgin. So do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Indeed, yes. So my name's Jim Hunter. I've worked in the city for over 25 years now, so maybe a slightly different profile to a lot of your guests. In terms of what I do, I've tended to work in the digital and change space, so technology change, business change, and so on. In terms of my link to sociology, I did an A-level a long time ago, and I also did a degree in sociology about 30 years ago. So I do have some sociology chops that underlie the reason for me being here. I also did, about 15 years ago, I did a master's in business psychology as well. So I maintain an interest in social science, and I find it takes part in all aspects of life and my career.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jim. And the reason we're chatting today is you kind of got in touch based on something that I was discussing with Louise. And you sort of got involved in a Twitter exchange. So do you want to say a little bit about what it was that you wanted to chat about and what interested you?
Yeah, I suppose that there's a couple of things really. So one is my experience of sociology as a subject and where it has and where it hasn't got to. And then I suppose there's the broader issue of education itself. So that podcast that you did with Louise, I don't know when it was, a few weeks back, I was kind of walking down the road nodding and saying, yeah, which you can get away with these days because everyone knows you've got earphones in. And I felt quite strongly that there's a lot more that we could do education-wise with sociology specifically in the way it's taught, and at least certainly the way I've experienced it. I'm still perhaps catching up from what might be a slightly old-fashioned experience now, but I still feel that it's perhaps not as unified a subject as it could be, and that might be holding up its success, and possibly, to link to the second point, therefore it's better adoption in broader education.
That's right. So just a reminder, when I was chatting to Louise, we were talking about the fact that obviously sociology has had to change, particularly the exams over the last couple of years, and whether this was a sort of groundbreaking moment of time, an opportunity to relook at education.
Yeah.
The subject itself, what could change? Do we have to go down the exam route? And also, that, like you said, the future of sociology. Where do we go from here to arguably get a bigger market, a wider, broader number of people doing it, and increase its popularity? I mean, it is already a very, very popular A-level. I believe it's the 6th most popular in the country at the moment, but no reason to even push on and make it even more popular than it already is.
I fully agree. And certainly from my perspective and having been in, working on the business side for many years, it's very much a second place to psychology, for example, and wearing both hats, I see that. And, it's not only a shame for sociology, but there are so many areas that you see and clasp your head in frustration. You think, if only they thought differently. The whole world thinks very psychologically, even in a common sense way, and the focus is always on the individual, and that pervades all society, I think. So let's change that.
I mean, should we start with what perhaps is going wrong before we sort of look at resolutions?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is the sort of main issue? Obviously, sociology can be taught at GCSE A-level degree. What would you say are the sort of the main downfalls of it at the moment?
I'll tell you what I think is the case. And like I say, forgive me if I'm slightly behind, but my experience was I loved the subject, which is why I did it at degree, and I really enjoyed my degree. But I left thinking that there's a subject which has so much to offer, but didn't feel like it was sufficiently coherent, and that there was a good kind of, not a simple theory that everyone signs up to. That would be ridiculous and impossible, and not even, I don't think, desirable. But it just doesn't feel like there was a unified approach. So, and it still feels, just from listening to these podcasts and looking elsewhere, we rightly teach the history of sociology, how it developed, the different perspectives, the key topics, the research methods. And, there's also some good ingredients, if you like, that are put out there. And you did a really good podcast summarizing key terms for people like, I don't know, socialization, ascribed status, development of the self, etc., etc. But I don't always feel like there's a recipe, a good recipe that pulls those things together. And for me, actually, a pivotal moment was after I left university, and don't ask me why, but I ended up picking up a copy of Berger and Luckman's Social Construction of Reality. And I read that, and that was such a wow moment, because they strung all this together in the 60s. And for me, that's like, I feel like we've maybe lost that book, or maybe I'm missing something. But there are gaps in it. It's not perfect, but I think that does so much, where they draw together, Weber, Durkheim, Marx, and kind of bookend it with Alfred Schutz, George Herbert Mead, all those kind of big authors that we talk about in sociology. And I think, this feels like a good recipe, almost a paradigm where you could say this broadly works for sociology, and you could teach people to link it back to your conversation with Louise, as much to critically engage. I think she talked about critical thinking. Yeah. And rather than just what I think frustrates you both, and frustrates me as a parent, there's a lot of teaching of facts and just learning stuff, which is maybe quite boring. Some of it's useful. Some of it maybe doesn't teach you the full kind of skill set that you want people to go away with. And also it's just not as engaging, I presume.
I mean, definitely that's something that I've been thinking about and talking about for a long, long period of time. That students do learn facts, they learn details, they learn about the researchers, and there is a certain amount of regurgitation. I mean, I had an essay for students that they had to do this week, which is a really interesting question, assessing the view that capitalism is the main contributor to ethnic inequality. Really interesting question. But of course, when the students come to answer it, what they're doing is looking through a book and regurgitating what other people have said, without the opportunity to actually say what they think, what their view is, that kind of critical analysis. So I'm not really sure what we're teaching other than memory skills, in something like that.
Yeah, and let's not be hard on sociology compared to other subjects because I think most of them are done like that.
Yes.
Is probably fair. I don't know. But that's, again, as a parent, that would be my sense of how subjects are taught now. And there's always going to be some of that, but you really want to bring people up that are prepared for society and can usefully contribute, but enjoy their education and can relate it back to themselves. I think Louise talked about doing kind of biographical work with her students, which sounds great because then you start to think about things, start to link those kind of key topics that you learn. I don't know about GCSE, but certainly at A level, the big institutions of education, of family, and start to think about, well, what do those things mean? How do they link to the other topics that you might learn, such as gender or race, and making those actually a kind of integrated approach that people can feel in terms of their own biography, learn about themselves, but apply that holistically to problems that they come across every day and will do throughout their careers.
Yeah, because I think that's a really important point, that sociology, for me, kind of identifies the problems. You know, we talk about the issues of systemic racism or patriarchy, for example.
Yeah.
But identifying is only part of it. Surely the point is to change it. So,
yeah.
Now, here comes a difficult question, though, Jim, because that's very, very easy to say, and obviously it's very ambitious, and it's quite a nice idea. But I'm not sure how you actually get that into the classroom.
Well, therein lies the challenge, and I don't have a simple answer to that. However, I think there's an element of, to take it back to my comment about that podcast you did, where you draw out key definitions in sociology and their importance and significance. What are those key factors? I think it's about a simple way of articulating what the social process is, so that people can work with it and engage with it and understand it. So just to give an example of what Berger and Luckman do in their book, they talk a lot about the internalization of social reality and social structure in addition to the institutions that are socially produced. So there's a what they call a dialectic. There's a relationship between those things that's an ongoing construction of social reality. So if you start to visualize that, give people key terms, start to get them to analyze their own situations, but also some of the real messy problems that are in front of us right now. So take the Met Police, for example, racism in sport. You have real knotty, big issues at the moment. What's going on there? What's going on with them as institutions? And how do you go fix them? There's some examples like that just make you think, well, it's not just about the institution changing its procedures and processes and doing a bit of training. You actually need to look at it as to how it functions in society and what are the relationships with the police, for example, in order to improve that. How do you do that systemically? So I think it's getting people to think more holistically about things so that you can solve things rather just on a piecemeal basis, but to look at it as a system, if you like, an open system.
Yeah, to go back to what we said, that subjects, sociology included, have become very exam focused.
Yeah,
this sounds like we're slightly going back in time, but I think there's a big argument for bringing back a fair amount of coursework where someone does their own project. You know, let's take your example. You could have a student that did a piece of research on the Met Police. They could possibly go and interview people within the Met Police, offer solutions or possible solutions. I mean, to me, that feels much more like real sociology than learning facts from a book.
I fully agree. And wouldn't it be great if students were given the freedom to go and do that, to do something that is frankly not only relevant and applied, but useful. Totally. And to give you another example, a really specific one that I've come across in the work environment for one of my clients, there's a thing now called, what do they call it? Something like a gender decoder on job descriptions.
Okay.
So in a perfectly, sound attempt to rebalance, especially in an area like financial services, which is historically full of men, and to try and improve, the balance of participation there. Well, there was a study done, I think it was a psychology study done 10 years ago or something, but the long and short of it was that there were words that were deemed unfavourable or favourable to women applicants. And this is all kind of coded up now, and lots of recruiters are using this, saying you need to change your wording in job descriptions and so on. But actually, some of that wording, you think, well, is that more an issue of role attraction rather than a problem with the wording of the role itself? So if you don't perceive that a role is suitable for you or done by people like you, then it's less attractive. But, there are suggestions going around that you should remove certain words because they are gender coded. To give you an example, I think words like management and analysis were deemed to be male. That doesn't feel right, does it? Because it isn't. And I think the reason I highlight that example is what I think is going on there, maybe more that these are the things that people don't think suit them or fit them. And that's the problem that needs to be addressed. So it's more around role models and being very visible about diverse people doing all sorts of roles, especially in areas like technology, which again is still very male dominated. Those kind of areas don't attract as many females to them. So I think it's just around trying to, rather than knee-jerk reaction to some of the things that are out there, is trying to analyse. And I actually pushed back on one of these suggestions from a place of work and said, it was a job description that was written by a woman and approved by a woman. I happen to be an approver as well. I said, no, this is the job. What's highlighted here is something quite different. So I think it's trying to get people to think a bit more deep about things that you actually come across. And there's all sorts of things out there where people are just focused again on a very specific targeted thing that perhaps doesn't quite meet the need of the problem.
But that does open the opportunities for students to go quite niche, doesn't it? So, if you think of different sociology students across the country, invariably people have various different interests. Some are more interested in ethnicity, some are more interested in work or religion or whatever it may be. If you open up that door to say, you direct your education, you do the piece of coursework on what you want, the project, or interview who you want, you push it into so many different directions rather than limiting it by what a specification says.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of having a subject that is taught well and understood and there's a shared understanding of it, you probably will always need some common body of knowledge. But to have a research topic that a student, like you say, is naturally interested in and can pursue and do a good piece of work that's relevant and up to date and interesting would be really powerful.
Because just turning that on its head a little bit, the argument's always against kind of project work or coursework or putting together a course file is that it's quite difficult or subjective to mark. If all students across the country are doing exactly the same essay and you've got a clear grading criteria, it's a lot easier to work out who's got an A star and who's got an E grade. So that's a potential stumbling block. So what can we do with that, Jim? What do you think? Because if you are sending off people to do very niche, individualistic kind of pieces of research, how do you actually grade that or mark that or award it?
Well, I'm sure teachers would give you a better answer than I will. I suppose one way of that is controlling the output. So if it must be an essay and a PowerPoint and a verbal presentation that people do and you mark them on certain standardized criteria across those outputs, then that's one way that you could manage that. If it's mainly a written piece of work, then projects and dissertations and can't remember what you call them at sort of A level. I mean, I did communications back in the day, but I had to do a kind of mini project there. So it's not like you'd be introducing something new. I appreciate there are challenges in being objective about marking it, but I think it's one of those where you could construct a framework for marking things that would be fair and flexible. And perhaps the main flexibility is around the topic and less about the output. But I don't know. There are others who might answer that one better than myself.
Yeah, I mean it's successful in things like BTECs, and we once upon a time had GMDQs. So there is obviously
Yes,
ways in which to manage it and do it.
exactly.
I just wonder if there's still a bit of snobbery about A levels being the way in which they are, rather than more kind of coursework based or evidence based.
Yes, probably is. And snobbery's a continuing problem in education, isn't it? I think, yeah, that absolutely needs to change, because at the moment we seem to have a very skewed idea of what education should be doing. And we continue to just teach academic subjects, almost raising academics, albeit not in the way that you'd want to, and then expecting people to go out and do very different things. So I think fundamentally it takes it back to what do you want education to achieve? And even the oft dismissed functionalist views are maybe quite useful here. I mean, she said, I don't know, 3 things. You want to prepare people to live in society, you want to prepare them for work, and maybe throw in something about health and happiness. Then if you had 3 high level, I've just made that up, of course, but objectives like that you would in reality argue about and get them to be right, I think you would actually end up with a very different curriculum. And I think if you're really radical about it, then you would probably change it so that the subjects no longer existed at school level and only at university level. That's perhaps a conversation for another time, but you could do things very differently in education.
Yeah, I don't think you make one of the targets to learn facts to be able to pass an exam. I don't think that would be, it would be a great target. I just wondered as well, Jim, working in the world of business, I just wondered if this is a common problem. If students have just been taught to pass exams, which is not their fault, of course, if they're then sent off to go and do project work, think of some ideas, think of this, think of that. If those skills haven't been taught throughout education, that's a real problem.
Yeah, actually, what you want a lot of the time is people who can come in, who can research information for varying reasons, analyze it, present it back with a good conclusion. Sounds like a project, doesn't it? But that's really what you want people to be able to do. So if you can actually impart good skills in that regard, then I think that would be really, really powerful.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for the Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Louise has just joined us. Hi, Louise. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Apologies for being late, but I had to go and have a blood test sort of like quickly.
No problem. We are just putting the world to rights on what we should do with the world of sociology. Jim, we've just been talking about the possibility of doing more project work, doing more coursework, so sociology isn't so exam-based. And this is a question for both of you. If you had a magic wand to change the subject tomorrow, what else would you do with it? What else would you either take away or put in?
Okay, so I think I'm with you in the sense that exams and stuff, because some people are really good at that, and then not everybody is. But I think sometimes it also creates a lot of pressure for people. It doesn't always give people the chance to sort of think critically. So I think if I mean, I wouldn't say I'd do away with them, but I'd certainly have less of them. But then, in relation to the last podcast we did, I would also kind of bring more work that allows the students to reflect on the whole self. So, I mean, I think I sort of mentioned in our conversation that stuff around autobiography, for example, because that's a sociological method. It's a research method, and I think it's growing within sociology. It allows reflexivity in terms of the whole self. And then also, I think in a way, this is very useful for employability. I mean, I think some people would definitely disagree with that, but I think it is, because obviously, if you've written something and you're reflecting on who you are, what your strengths are, I think this is going to sort of like help, because, and it also shows you that you're adaptable and that you can use different research methods rather than the ones that, you're always taught about. So I think that's what I would change. So like more stuff that allows the student to reflect on themselves, but perhaps not completely do away with exams, but perhaps less.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking, I can only talk from my exam board at the moment, but A-level, it is 100% exam for AS, for A-level, and as far as I'm aware, for GCSE as well. So there's got to be some movement there, hasn't there? Jim, for yourself, anything else you'd change?
Yeah, I mean, I'd support that, and fully supportive of Louise's point about biography, and it comes back to that internalizing things, and I don't think that's always fully absorbed in sociology, is how people take things in internally and the social structures and social reality out there. So doing that with biographically is a really great starting point, and then applying that things, just as we were saying, to a real project where you're developing research skills. You have to go and speak to people, you have to write, you have to present, and that being marked in a way that those that run education isn't just exams, but it's done differently, so that you're actually looking for a range of skills. Those skills would translate far better into life and business than simply just learning and regurgitating facts.
Yeah, I mean, also I keep talking about Paulo Freire, because I mean he was very concerned about this approach of just using just learning things just because you've got to take an exam. So I think it is about kind of broadening that. And also, the sociological imagination. So, I mean, I think, using alternative methods allows for students to create the sociological imagination, because that's what it's all, I think that's really what it's all about. And I think you could even sort of like extend that, because I know in some of the programs here, they're using podcasts as assessments as well, or like, little kind of mini portfolio things where you're just doing little pieces of work to kind of like analyze a particular issue or some readings around that kind of issue. So, I mean, podcasts are good, or like, creating social media websites, because a lot of the students as well, they won't, not to say that they won't go into traditional jobs, but I do think that, they are sort of like moving away from those dominant careers that perhaps we would have gone into. I mean, one of my students is actually doing a dissertation on that at the moment, because she's looking at how people are moving towards kind of careers in social media. So I think that if this is what the next generation are doing, I think we need to be sort of mindful of this and allowing them to kind of like use their creativity as part of that, but then also equip them with the skills to go into those kind of careers if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, agreed. The sociology of TikTok and Instagram, that's where we need to be at the moment. Could I ask another question, which I've seen come up quite a lot, and it's quite a difficult one to know what to do, and I'm interested to know your thoughts on it. It doesn't take students too long into a course to realise that a lot of what they're learning about, particularly in terms of the founding fathers of sociology, is that it's very male, it's very white, and it's very westernised.
Yeah.
The difficulty is, unfortunately, that is the history of sociology. So that's where the founding fathers of sociology came from. So do you think there is still the place to teach the classics and teach the founding fathers, or do we almost kind of need to rip it up and start again? I know that's quite a broad question, but, if we want to keep sociology fresh and contemporary, do we still teach the past, or do we sort of try and look at it from new eyes?
Don't you do both? As in, you teach the past, but you relook at the past with some of the older sociologists that certainly when I was doing the subject, you didn't hear about, your Ibn Khaldoun's and Margaret Mead, and I don't know, other sociologists that, whether they were called sociologists at the time or not, but actually people that contributed significantly to the subject, but just had little or no visibility at the time. So I think my reaction would be is to reinterpret the past and make it more integral, but also describe the history of sociology as very much a European and American topic to start with, tell it how it is, and then look to build on, well, where is it now and how is it changing and how has it become globalized? I think, that would be my view. I don't know, Louise, what do you think?
I mean, I think it is one of those ones where you have to, in a sense, you do have to sort of like keep the classics. But I also think that there's nothing wrong with sort of like critiquing those classics as well from, from the viewpoints of people, like non-Western sociologists or, people coming from or women sociologists and stuff. So I think that we should be doing that. I mean, and also, but I do also think that it's all well and good having these sociologists as a center, but then I also think that we probably need to like decenter them or give an equal place on the stage to, sociology. Well, I wouldn't call him a sociologist, but he's still used within sociology. People like, Fanon or people like Du Bois, all those kinds of, Amy, her name is Amy Garvey. I mean, I know she wasn't quite a sociologist, but, she was a feminist and she was advocating for women's rights. So I think it's about slightly decentering or at least giving people an equal stage, because I remember, I think it was before we went on the lockdown, and I taught a black feminist class in politics, and there were all these people, they didn't know who I was talking about, I mean, and it was good. They really liked that. They really liked the fact that I was bringing these people in, but it was, for them, it was kind of like refreshing. So I think we should kind of like look at historical people, that people from across the spectrum who were writing at roughly the same time, but not just Durkheim and Marx and Weber. And
Yeah, agreed. And one of the other things that I'm quite interested in myself is that I've got a first year class this year, so there's 16, 17, class of 25 odd, and there's 3 boys. Okay, and across all of my classes, actually, we're probably talking about 80%, sometimes 90% females. Now, if sociology, if we achieve our ambition, us 3, of changing the world with sociology, I think we also need to attract more males into the subject. Louise, I don't know if you've got any ideas of how we do that.
Well, I mean, I think it's partly about, because sometimes I think it's a lot to do with socialization. Because it's funny, I did a lecture on gender last week, and we were talking about our sort of primary early socializations experiences, and a lot of that is to do with, okay, well, boys do this, girls do this. But I think that for a start, like we've got to change the way that, what gender role expectations are and how this filters into, into schooling, not just within sociology, but it's got to be sort of making people realize that they can do whatever they want regardless of their gender. So I think if it starts from an earlier age and from primary school or whatever, and we start to shift the narrative there, I think this will just kind of start to change things across the board, not just in terms of getting them to do sociology A-level or whatever, but just across the board in terms of what's acceptable for boys and what's acceptable for girls. And also, I think we need to be considering things like, people who are transgender as well, what do they want to do and stuff like that? What are their experiences? And because I think this is the thing that kind of does get a little bit overlooked in the education system. What are their experiences? How does this inform what it is that they want to study and everything? But I do think that you've got to start right from the socialization stage, because if you start to do it when you get to A-level, people's ideas are fully formed already.
Agreed. Jim, male point of view, what do you think would attract more men into the subject?
That's a really tough question, actually. And I found, because I was always interested in people, I was more than happy to take the subject, and I didn't have any kind of gendered view. But to answer the question more generally, I think we need to sell its application more as to how useful it is, and also how actually coupled it is with things. And again, I draw it back to what are the big problems of the day. You talk about things like COVID, talk about things like climate change. I think most people, when they talk about the science there, they think the natural science. But actually, in both those examples, how much of that is behavioural, not just psychological? How much of that is behavioural change that is required, and behavioural collaboration and cooperation that is required to actually overcome these problems. It's not just STEM, it's not just tech and science. Those things kind of got us in the way that we are to a degree, and they will help us get out of the way. But a lot of it actually is behavioural, but it's just not recognised as such. So we need to change the way these things are recognised and understood, and the fact that sociology can actually work really well with other disciplines like neuroscience. You hear a lot of studies that will couple up disciplines to actually work on a problem and different aspects of a problem. Which I mean,
I would agree with that. I would agree with that because one of my mentor, Gail Leatherby, she does quite a lot of stuff, and also I have another colleague as well called Tanisha Simpson, and not Simpson. Oh gosh, her name is it's terrible. I hope she forgives me for not forgetting her name. But anyway, so she does quite a lot of medical sociology. So she kind of like they both liaise with people in the medical fields. I mean, I know, for example, last year I had to give a lecture to some consultants, because I had a particular, using autobiography as well, but, to explain what happened in terms of a condition, but looking at it from a sociological viewpoint. So, I mean, I think there is so much crossover, and I do agree that it is how it's kind of sold as well. So, yeah.
I think it's all sold as a bit nice and a bit optional.
Yes.
And it's not. It isn't that. These are major problems. We talked about, gender and race as well earlier. These are the biggest problems there are right now, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've been banging the drum for, sociology as a compulsory subject in schools, and not even necessarily calling it sociology, but bringing some of those elements into the likes of PSHE and so on. But you're exactly right, Jim. If you think of the major concerns that we're seeing every time we turn on the news, then if we want the next generation to tackle it and think of solutions, then they've got to be doing it in school as well.
Yeah,
exactly. And I fully agree with, well, you know what I said, Louise, you wouldn't have heard this, but what I said at the outset, if you had to write the curriculum with different objectives, you wouldn't be doing, never mind triple social science, which we'd all argue for, right? But you wouldn't be doing all these things as subjects. I think you would be doing just completely different topics that are organized around how to live, how to work, how to improve things, etc. I don't think the traditional subjects would exist at all, but they would be blended in with maths, English, natural science, on actual things that people can apply to real life and do practical things with.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder as well whether one of the reasons why sociology and, there's questioning subjects like philosophy and all of that. I just wonder whether it's got a lot to do with the hidden curriculum and the fact that they don't want people questioning things too much. Because I think I once read a really good article, and it was just kind of like saying that, what would happen if the world was kind of had just as many sociologists, or like, sociology was given the same kind of level of recognition as economics and stuff like that. And this person was just speculating, and it created a very, very different picture. And in my opinion, it was more of a kind of balanced picture. But I think one of the reasons why this area is not kind of like promoted, I think just it's because it poses too many questions that people may be a little bit uncomfortable with.
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? Why would the government want to push something which ultimately probably criticises them and wants to take them down? It kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
That's true, but I think again that's where you also have to position it as it's not just some revolutionary thing. It's a thing that's there to solve real problems in support of the government, assuming they're a good government, and I'll leave it just there, right? But you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true.
No, I absolutely hear you. I do hear you and stuff. So yeah.
My final question really is, what concerns me or worries me is that in 5 years, 10 years time, we'll be having this same discussion. So what can actually happen to make progressive steps to actually see some change, and for our students to be part of their future and make those changes for their own future?
Do you know, I feel like it's already, I don't know if it's the students that I have, but it's like every time I think I mentioned this before, every time I teach them, every week there is something, I learn something new. And, you know, I have a couple that are quite, you know, they're activists. They're very aware of the world. I mean, and partly it's to do with their direct experiences and stuff like that. So they're kind of doing quite a lot of activism if it's not out doing protests. For example, we had one student who organized a demonstration because of what had happened in Italy with the, you know, with the anti-LGBTQIA plus laws. So he organized a demonstration here in London. And, you know, I think a lot of them are activists. They know what's going on. And, you know, if they're not doing it like that, they're doing it online. So I think it's just about trying to sort of encourage them more to keep doing these sorts of things. And I think the way to do it is like, you know, Jim was saying before, it's about kind of saying to everyone that, look, you know, there's some real stuff going down here. So, you know, with this knowledge and with your activism, you know, you can make change. And I feel like, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, you really are going to see the younger generation even come out, you know, really pull out the stops to bring about social change and everything. So if they have if you can sell it, if you can sell sociology in a way that tells them that, look, you know, you've got this knowledge, and then, like, you know, get a bit more just to back it with what you're saying, I think the situation will be very, very different, because I just don't think things can go on the way that they are at the moment.
No, and there is a real thirst for it, isn't there, among the current younger generation. I think in terms of political activism, I don't think I've taught an age group that are so aware and have gone on so many marches from Black Lives Matter to climate change and so on. The popularity and interest is staggeringly high. So there is obviously a thirst to make those changes.
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's good. And I think the word activism, I think, is interesting, because you said political activism there, Matthew, which is obviously really important and frankly should be encouraged. But I think activism in the broadest sense, you know, guerrilla sociology, call it what you like, is that anyone that's done and learnt sociology should look to apply it outside the classroom in situations that they come across, apply it critically, offer solutions, and actively talk about it as a subject and promote it at the kind of ground level. So I think there's a lot of ground level work that should be done. In terms of its official status, I mean, I did a tweet to the Science Museum recently saying, what if the Science Museum included social science? What would be there? No one answered it.
Funny that, isn't it?
But in seriousness, you need to get into those places. You need to get into organisations where people still, you know, back to what I was saying earlier, people think individualistically. That's the prevailing mentality, psychologically, and in common sense, that's the way people think. I mean, there's a wonderful a project that Google did called Project Aristotle a few years ago. I don't know if you heard about it, but in short, what they were trying to do was to separate out the criteria that identified their best performing teams and what to do about creating better performing teams. Now, Google being Google went inside people's heads and found nothing. So they had to get in a mixture of psychologists and sociologists to go, what's going on here? And of course, it's actually all about team processes, group dynamics, and everything going on between people's heads, not just psychology.
Yes.
And it's things like that. So in business, like I say, psychology has a hold, which may to some degree partly be because you've got professional qualifications like occupational psychology masters. Should you create professional subsets of sociology with associated masters and specialisms is another route. What other ways can you platform things and line up with sociologists with actual consultancies doing work for government or other organizations, corporates or whatever? So I think there's a whole program of change to avoid, Matthew, you having to speak to us again in 5 years and say we're still here.
I would agree with that. I mean, it is about kind of plugging into as many levels as possible. I mean, one other thing that I've just finished doing, but I think I'll be doing again, is that, like, I was working with kids, not kids, but like young women, on stop and search. So I was sort of teaching them research method skills because they hadn't done it before, but they were actually going to go out and just kind of like, do some research with students it was young people, young women who had been stopped and searched. So in that sense, they're using sociology that they weren't necessarily aware of before to actually address a social issue right there, because, they were, again, they were kind of activists against it. So I think it is about trying to plug into as many, not just like, the large institutions, but also the grassroots ones as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks, Louise. Unfortunately, we're slightly out of time. I've got a feeling that we could chat about how to change the world for about 3 or 4 hours. So maybe we'll do another one of these in the future. But unfortunately, we're out of time for the moment. So I'd like to really thank you for your contributions today.
Thanks for having us on.
No, that's great. I really appreciate it. And let's hope that even if there's small steps, that we do see changes over the next 5-10 years. And as you say, that we're not having this conversation again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Okay, thank you very, very much. Okay,
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.